Hey everybody, I'm Mike Kazimer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new RockShox ZEB. What differentiates it from the Lyric? Well, for one thing, bigger stanchions. They measure 38 millimeters. Now, some of you might remember the Totem that was in RockShox's lineup back in the day, and that had 40 millimeter stanchions, but never really made it past the 26-inch wheel stage. So this is basically the replacement. It's called the ZEB. Travel options range from 160, 170, 180, and then 190s. Now, where does the name ZEB come from? Well, Zebul Pike, he was an old-time kind of explorer. He was a general in the early 1800s. And Pikes Peak, which is near Colorado Springs, Colorado, happens to be named after him. And so they took his first name and gave it to this fork. Big travel fork, big stanchions. You can get it with a 1.5-inch tapered steer tube or a 1.8-inch tapered steer tube. Now that's more for the e-bike crowd. We're kind of starting to see that become popping up in a few places, but I think most riders will get the 1.5-inch version. Other features internally, it's a lot like the Lyric. You have that Charger 2.1 damper, the new Debonair air spring, just designed to give it that supple, super smooth off the top feeling. Good for the really big hits, rough trails. And for $20 extra, you can get a fender that finally uses the 3 bolts on the back of the arch. You have a 200 millimeter post mount, so you can't run any 180 millimeter rotors. It has to be bigger than 200 millimeters. You can run 203, 220. This arch here sits a little bit further away, and that's because we're starting to see bikes come out with oversized head tubes, a little bit larger. And if you're deep in the travel, you don't want your head tube smashing into that crown. On the Ultimate version, which is this one here, retails for $999 US. You've got adjustable high speed compression, low speed compression, and rebound. You also can tune the amount of N-stroke ramp up with volume spacers, and those use the same ones that you would use on the Lyric, those gray ones. As far as weight goes, this one right here weighs in at 2,250 grams, and that's for the 29-inch, 170 millimeter version. And that's around 250 grams more than the Lyric, so looking at about half-pound weight difference there. RockShox today has 21.5% more torsional stiffness. So those are twisting motions, kind of feel that if you're going into a hard turn, really loading up the fork. Fore and aft stiffness, not really a huge difference between this versus the Lyric. They're saying 2% stiffness difference there. And then side bending stiffness, they say that the ZEB is 7% stiffer. So overall, it's mostly that torsional stiffness that they've increased by going with that larger stanchion diameter and the different crown design. Because it takes a little bit lower air pressure, 1 or 2 pounds of change in that pressure can make a difference. So it's pretty easy to kind of fine tune it. 55 feels a little too stiff. Try dropping down to 53, up to 57 if you want more support. So fairly simple there. It is very nice and supple off the top. Just where I really appreciate though is in bigger hits, it has that bottomless feel. I know it sounds kind of like a cliche, but there's no clanging off the bottom of the stroke here. I've used full travel, but I never felt that harsh impact that really kind of jolts you and can affect your ride. And for most of the test period so far, I've been running no volume spacers in there at all. Conditions have been on the wetter side of things. I've been riding a little softer, kind of loamier trails. As things get a little bit more hard packed and dry, I'll probably put 1 more volume spacer in there, but overall, I've had plenty of support for my weight. I may not be the heaviest rider, but I can still feel the stiffness difference between this and the Lyric. It's more noticeable kind of in the steeps when you're really diving into turns. And I can notice it in straightaways too, when you're just kind of really hanging on those bars, letting it track through whatever's in your way. It doesn't feel like it can get deflected quite as easily. It's worth noting, I don't have any complaints about the stiffness of the Lyric, but for somebody that does want something a little bit beefier, a little burlier, this could be a good option. Might as well pull this thing apart and see what's inside. Start by letting the air out. And the air volume is a little bit lower on this than you would have on other RockShox forks due to the different air chamber diameter. For my weight, 160 pounds, running about 55 PSI, or on a Lyric, I'm usually somewhere in the 80s. So something to keep in mind. I did cheat a little bit and I drained most of the oil just so that I won't have a big mess here, but there would be 20 mils of oil in each side that would come out once you did this. So on the Lyric, the new Debonair air spring sits in a little bit different spot so that there's not as much of a dead spot in the beginning of the travel. Do this here. So they're not interchangeable just because the stanchion tube diameter is different, but the basics are relatively the same. So that's the air spring. Pretty easy to swap out if you're changing travel. You'd do what I just did, and then put in a different one for the next size that you were going for. Let's see, now we can pull that air cap off. Let's take a look in there. So I've been running it without any volume spacers, just because of the terrain I've been riding and my setup, but up to 1 or 2, it's been, you know, kind of experimenting with that. They just thread on right there. This just gives you an idea, kind of basically what's inside. It's not going to do a full rebuild. I'm not going to pull apart the damper all the way, but let's see to kind of see all little bits and pieces that are inside this fork. And really the architecture is very similar to what you'd find in the rest of RockShox's lineup. So here's the Charger 2.1 damper. So give it a little wipe down so I don't get oil everywhere. Basically it has this bladder right here. So as it compresses, the bladder expands to compensate for that displaced oil. You see it gets a little bigger like that, swells up. And then on the rebound, kind of shrinks back down again. This is the ultimate version, so this is the one that does have the adjustable high speed and low speed compression. If you go down to the select version, it has a slightly different damper that only has low speed compression and rebound. And then there's even a simpler version that just has rebound as your available option. That's aimed more at e-bikers, kind of a bike you can just hop on, inflate the air pressure to your recommended settings, adjust the rebound, and roll on out. There you have it. That's the brand new RockShox ZEB. What do you think? You got a place for this fork on one of your bikes? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, as well as check out our podcast. You can find that in the video description. And thanks for watching.